My name is Heather. I am the founder of leavenly.com and the Sourdough Mamas community. So, Sourdough Mamas Live, like I talked about, is all about topics that matter to you. So, in this one, we're talking about how to dry and revive your sourdough starter. And basically, what we're going to cover is I'm going to demonstrate how to actually dry your starter. Obviously, I'm not going to be on the call on this webinar for 2 or 3 full days because that's how long it takes. But I'm going to show you how to put your starter and spread it out nice and thin, and then we'll talk through the next steps as well. I'll show you what my starter looks like as it's dry, and what it looks like when it's stored in my pantry. And also we're going to go through how to revive your dried starter. So it's a really simple process. It does take 2 to 3 days on either end for drying and for reviving, but it's really good insurance. And we'll touch on that in just a few minutes. So I think in future formats, this is kind of an aside, but I think as future formats for the Sourdough Mamas Live, this is a webinar format. And I'm thinking next time I might do it as a Zoom call so that the participants can actually ask questions using their video. And when they ask a question, their video will pop up and they can ask the question that way. Let me know what you guys think of that idea, either in the chat right now if you're watching live, or in the comments below if you're watching later. Let me know which format you would prefer, if you'd like more interactive, because it is generally smaller groups who are part of the Sourdough Mamas Live, or if you like the webinar format where people are typing and it's just my face on the screen the whole time. So you let me know, because I'm making this for you. So let's get started. Why would we even dry a starter in the first place? So we would dry a starter for long-term storage, because as you know, the starter that you keep on your countertop will not last for more than a few days. Eventually it will go rancid, it will dry out, it might grow mold, so you can't store it indefinitely on the counter unless of course you're feeding it every day. So if you're looking for a long-term solution, then this is it. I've heard of people who are moving, they'll dry their starter out. I've heard of people drying starter to give to a neighbor, to give to friends, to send it across the country. So it's a really easy way to give as a gift that way. In fact, my stepmom was up visiting recently last week, and she asked for some of my dried starters. She took it home, revived it, and she's made like 3 beautiful sourdough loaves from it already. That was just a week ago. So it's really cool to see how quickly it becomes active again. It's a really neat experiment as well. If you have young kids, they would totally be into this. And also, it's good insurance against a big, major catastrophic event. So as you might know, it's really quite hard to kill a starter. When you're starting out, it might seem like your starter is slowing down. You might think it's died, but it's not. It hasn't died. There are, I think off the top of my head, about 3 catastrophic events that I would consider your starter to be ruined. One is if you accidentally bake it in the oven, and we're going to talk about how to maybe avoid that also in a few minutes. But if you have it in the oven, warming, hoping that it'll rise a little bit faster in that warm environment, and someone comes along and turns the oven on, poof, your starter is baked, it's cooked, it's rock solid, and there's nothing you can do about it, unfortunately. And then what do? You have to start all over again. You don't have any backup. So that's why you would dry a starter. Another catastrophic event is, I'm walking along carrying my glass jar through my kitchen, and I trip on a kid's toy on the floor, because that happens all the time. And I drop it and it shatters, the glass gets all in the starter. I've seen some people who will put it through a strainer, but it's so sketchy, I think, to do that, because there's no guarantee that you got all the small glass shards out of your starter, and you're baking bread and you're feeding people, so it's a major safety issue. So that starter, unfortunately, is gone, lost forever. The other example I can think of is mold. So sometimes if you catch the mold early, and it's just on the surface, you can scrape it off and then take the starter from underneath and feed that starter, and then you likely be okay. It's kind of use caution, use your best judgment, do it at your own risk type of thing. I know personally I've done it once or twice. I'm not guaranteed that it's mold. I'm looking at it thinking, oh geez, that could be. So that's what I did to avoid it. But if you're guaranteed, like looking at it like, oh, that's disgusting, there's mold in it, it's all through it, throw it away, because again, it's a food safety issue. So those are 3 catastrophic things that I could think of off the top of my head. If any of you guys have ever had anything happen to your starter, I'd love to hear those stories. Luckily, knock on wood, nothing's happened to mine so far. Like I said, I almost thought I lost it to mold one time, but I got it back, and this is still Goldie. This is my starter, and she's happy and thriving in her Challenger starter jar. I use this thing so much. It used to say Challenger breadware, I think right there. You can see the letters are all rubbed off because I use this thing all the time. But that's what this jar is. It has a nice wooden top, and it seals completely when you close it. But what's cool, and it took me a long time to realize this, is that it's got small little holes on the rim of the seal, one over there and one over there. So when I first got this, I was like, you're not supposed to seal a starter in an airtight jar. So I took off the seal and I would do it this way. And that's fine. And then I did that for a few weeks. And then it occurred to me, Jim Challenger probably wouldn't sell a starter jar with a seal that had to be removed to have a starter in it. So I thought, why not? I'm just going to give it a shot. So I did a second starter just in case. I had 2 starters going for a bit, and I put the lid on and I sealed it. And what those holes do is they allow the gases to escape. So yes, it is airtight. Yes, it is a little safer from mold and drying out, but the holes allow the gas to escape. So it's perfect for that. So that's my little spiel on the Challenger starter jars. I absolutely love them. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you guys a demo on how to dry your starter. My starter is Goldie, and you can see that she's at peak or a little below peak. So when you're drying your starter, you're going to want to try to catch it when it's at its peak. I did my best. I had to time it kind of around the webinar, and as you know, temperature, climate, different ingredients. It's hard to exactly know when it's going to peak. So I did my best. It's already starting to fall a little bit, but that's okay. It's still going to be great. I don't think it's worth your while to dry a ripe starter, for example, like one that you haven't fed. So I would feed it, let it peak, and then spread it out. Real quick too, I just want to show you, this is my dried starter. So this is how I store it in my pantry, in a small little glass jar, just like this. And I put a label on it, there we go. I put a label on it. So I put dried starter, Goldie, January 2021, because that's when I dried mine. And I keep it in a small jar like this, and it's airtight, and it's nice and safe. And this is what it looks like when it's dried up. So it's little starter flakes in there like that. And oops, we're going to go over and I'll show you how to break these up. This is what your starter is going to look like once it's dried, and you break it up into the small pieces. So it's kind of cool, like this tiny little piece of starter, wait for the focus, wait for it. No, it's not going to do it. Can revive your entire starter. It's full of all the microbes that you need. So it's very cool. We're obviously going to use more than one flake. So I'm going to show you now how to dry your starter. I'm going to pull down my camera, get set up here. So I already have my cookie sheet. Sorry, I'm not sure how well that's going to stay down. So I have my cookie sheet here with my Silpat. And what Silpat is basically like a reusable liner for your pan. And I highly recommend these. I love them and I use them all the time. As you can tell, it's pretty worn. So I line my cookie sheet with the Silpat, and then I just place that down. Then I'm going to take my starter, and you're going to want at least 30 grams. But what I do is just pretty much just scoop and spread. So you'll get at least 30 grams that way. So I'm going to take my spatula, and I'm going to take a big spoonful of it and basically just plop it right in the middle of my Silpat like that and spread it out. What you're trying to do is make it as thin as possible, because you're going to leave this sitting out for a few days, and the air is going to dry your starter. And we'll talk about a couple options with drying your starter, different ways you can do it in a few minutes. But so the goal is to get it nice and thin. So really pulling it as far across as you can, and in all different directions, so that you can almost see through it. And you can tell in parts where it's too thick, and then other parts where it's almost too thin. So already I can tell that it's a little bit too thin in these areas here. You can see it darker, and then all along there, I'd say it was perfect. So I'm going to put a little bit more on my silpat and maybe over here and spread that out. And again, as thin as possible. And it doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be a perfect shape, but your goal is to make it thin, thin, thin. And you can kind of come along after the fact and scrape some off the top to make it even thinner. And see with that, that's how much extra I scraped off. So then you can just come along and put that up here and spread that out. So more or less something like that. I would probably fill my silpat right to the orange borders if I was doing this properly and not on video, but this is what it's going to look like. So then you're going to take this, your cookie sheet, and you're going to place it in the oven, and you're not going to turn the oven on. For the love of God, don't turn the oven on. Turn the light on if you have a functioning light inside, and you're going to leave it in there for 2 to 3 days to dry. So that's a long time to have something in the oven that you actually don't want to cook. So put one of these Post-it notes on your oven. Do yourself a favor, put it on there, go around to everyone in your house and say, this sticky note is going to be on the oven, and this means that my starter is in the oven, and that means that you can't turn the oven on unless you ask me first. And make sure they hear you and they understand, because you're putting it in the oven basically as a way to keep extra kind of yuckies from falling on the top of it, but as well it's nice and warm and it'll dry faster in that environment. So that is basically how you dry your starter. I was just checking the Q&A because somebody sent a question, and my clever husband, who's across town right now, said, I have a question, who got you that apron? Because he got me this apron. It was just my birthday. He bought me this apron because I sent him a direct link and told him this is what I want for my birthday, and he got it for me. It's a Hedley and Bennett apron, and I absolutely love it. And it fits really nice. So if you're looking for an apron, I will include a link to these too, because they're really, really great and I love it. But that was a big aside. And let me open that up again and say that I answered your silly question. So if you have a question, you can ask it in the Q&A, or you could ask it over in the chat, whatever is easiest for you guys. And all right, so we're going to take this, like I said, put the sticky note on your oven, put this in the oven with the light on, and then it's going to dry in like a weird warpy layer. When you first notice it's starting to dry, you'll see lighter spots and you'll see darker spots. And the darker spots are areas that still need to complete drying. They're not dry through all the way yet. So if there's even the smallest little part that you're thinking, gee, I wonder if that's dried all the way, leave it for 6 or 12 more hours. What you don't want to do is crumble up some starter that is still a little bit moist and put it in a jar in your pantry, because that's just prime for mold. So you're going to want to guarantee that it's super, super dry, which is why we spread it so thin like this in the beginning. And that's pretty much it. Once your starter is dry on the silpat or on the parchment paper, you're going to basically pull up. I'll show you here. You're basically going to pull up and kind of curve this down and under like that. And then when your starter's dry, it's going to separate from the silpat. So then at that point, you're going to kind of take handfuls of it and then you're going to crumble it up into small pieces. And like I showed you earlier, these are the size pieces that I do. You can do them in bigger pieces, you can do them in smaller pieces. And so it's like this, and they break very easily and crumble very easily. So you can just do it with your hand. And then once they're flaked and they're all crumbled up, put them in a airtight container, like a small little jar. I don't even know where I got this little guy, but he's really cute and it's perfect for a starter. And seal it really well. Label it so that you and other people in the house know what it is and when you dried it. I put the date on there too, just for my own curiosity, because I would probably forget when I dried it. And then not that it really matters, but it's kind of nice to know. Like, I dried this in January. So that's how I store it. And it's good indefinitely. Like I said, my stepmom was just here. I poured a little bit in a Ziploc bag, gave it to her. She revived it. I mailed some recently, actually, to Canada, to a family friend of mine as well, who's having trouble with her starter. So I said, don't worry, I'll send you some of mine. And I mailed it to her. And you can, just keep sending it and gifting it. And then you can just dry more and add it to your jar. So it's a really nice way to gift the gift of sourdough starter. Then when you're storing it, like I said, keep it in the pantry. Some people, you can freeze starter. Typically people freeze their liquid starters in things like ice cube trays or in small little Ziploc bags, and they just weigh out the quantities. They put it in the freezer and then they pull it out right before they need it to use it. Now, that's not an indefinite storage method. I think you can only do that for a couple of weeks before the ice crystals actually affect the microbes enough that it's not alive and working active anymore. So with this, you don't need to store this in the freezer, because the only thing that will do is risk freezer burn, and it's just not necessary. So just store it in the pantry in a cool, dark place. Like I keep mine in the very back corner of my pantry, and it's nice and happy there. So then to revive your starter, so say you have this sitting in your pantry and I have my starter, sitting on top of the stove, and then someone comes along and turns the stove burner on and it gets cooked. Then I have this. So I'm going to say, okay, well, I need 3 days to revive the starter. So I'm going to get started. So you're going to weigh out about 30 grams of your starter flakes. And by the way, I'm going to link to my actual blog post and recipe for this process. So no need to, feverishly scribble down any notes. I'll just basically telling you what's there. But this is the process. So about 30 grams of your flakes, and you're going to get a glass measuring cup like this. This is my 4-cup Pyrex, and this is perfect because you are going to have a large quantity when you're reviving your starter. And you can see through the glass to see what's going on inside your starter as well as on the top. If you don't have one of these, don't stress. You can just use a regular bowl. That's totally fine too. But if you have this, if it's an option, definitely use it. So this is what I would use. I would weigh out 30 grams and pour those in. And then I would add 60 grams of lukewarm water to those flakes. And what you're going to want to do is make sure all the flakes are fully submerged in the water. And then you just walk away for half an hour, give or take. By the way, none of this is very precise in terms of timing. You can totally wing this and it'll still work out. So about 30 minutes, you're going to come back and stir it, and you're going to stir it for every half hour for about 2 to 3 hours, basically until all the flakes have dissolved. Now, obviously, it's going to matter how small your flakes are. Some people like to pulverize it in a coffee grinder, for example, and make a powder. So in that case, it's only going to need like half an hour to an hour to fully dissolve. Whereas my flakes take 2 to 3 hours. If your flakes are bigger, it might be longer. So just be flexible and go with it. And then once the flakes have disappeared completely and it's like a watery glue texture almost, you're going to want to stir in 30 grams of all-purpose flour. Now save the whole wheat flour for now. Don't use that, just use the all-purpose. And then once it's stirred in, you're gonna lightly cover it either with a kitchen towel, or you can use something like the Challenger dough covers, which are these guys, which I use to cover my bannetons with, or shower cap, something like that. So you're going to want to cover your container like this so that it's not airtight. Some airflow can still go in, but you might find if you use a kitchen towel, your starter might end up getting too dry because there's too much airflow. So in that case, use something plastic like this, use some saran wrap, a shower cap, something like that. And you're going to let that sit there for a whole day, about 24 hours. Come back and check it after 24 hours. And then if there's no bubbles, just leave it alone and come back and check in 6 hours or so. If there are some bubbles, even just a couple, and that's great. That means there's activity happening and we're going to move on to the next step. So if there's even a few, you're going to feed 30 grams of flour, again, all purpose, and 30 grams of water, and stir it all up. And you're going to not discard any of it, because what we're doing now is we're building up the volume. So that's why I told you to get a nice big container. So you're going to have that in there, then you're going to put it to the side and let it sit for about 6 to 12 hours. And you're going to want to look, pay less attention to the timing and more attention to how your starter actually looks in the container. I wish I had some laid out that I could show you the different stages, and maybe in a future workshop I will, because that would be really helpful. But as you can imagine, you're going to want to see more bubbles in your starter than you did originally. So if you're only seeing a couple, if it's looking exactly the same as when you saw the bubbles the first time, you're going to want to wait a couple hours. But if you're seeing many bubbles, and that's great, and we can move on to the next step. So you're going to basically do that same exact step again. You're going to feed 30 grams of flour, 30 grams of water, and then you're going to stir it up really well and walk away for 6 to 12 hours again. Now this time you're going to want to watch for lots and lots of bubbles. So you're going to want to be seeing bubbles on the side. You're going to want to see bubbles on the top. And that means that your starter is nearly completely reactivated, which is super cool. Then at that point, you're going to want to discard all but 120 grams. So you're going to want to leave 120 grams of starter in here. Whatever you take out is legitimate discard. It's active discard, so you can use it in discard recipes. So there's no waste, which is great. And you're going to feed your 120 grams of starter at a 1:1:1 ratio. So 120 starter, 120 flour, and 120 water. Now at this point for your flour, you're going to want to do a 50-50 mix and introduce that whole wheat flour again. That is, if that's how you maintain your starter. That's how I personally do my starter. I always do 50-50 all-purpose and whole wheat flour. So at this point, you would do 60 grams whole wheat, 60 grams all-purpose, 120 water, and 120 starter. And you're going to stir that all up, and you basically just fed your starter and put it somewhere warm, again, with a cover. And within 3 to 4 hours, it should be doubled or more. And then you're going to know that it's active and you can go ahead and feed it as normal. So, you know, you're going to have a big volume of starter in here, and I don't maintain a big volume of starter. So then what I would do is take out 30 grams of this and feed it in my starter jar as normal. So that's basically how you revive it. It's about 2.5 to 3.5 days, depending on a lot of factors, you know, just like with sourdough. If you're living up in northern Canada, where it's not exactly very warm most of the year, then it's going to take a little bit longer. And whereas, you know, if you're living in Louisiana or Micronesia or somewhere where it's hot and humid, it's going to have activity a lot faster than it would if you were living somewhere cold. So again, just remember your climate, bear that in mind, and just watch your starter. Basically, you're going to be keeping an eye on those bubbles. And like I said, keep an eye less on the clock and more on your actual starter and the results that you're seeing. So a couple options when you're doing this whole process as well. You can use a dehydrator. So if you have a food dehydrator, use the fruit leather mats that come with it, and you can dehydrate it that way. It's obviously a much faster process. If your Revive starter seems like it's drying out when it's in here, like I talked about with a kitchen towel on top, then use plastic. It's less prone to airflow. Gases can still escape, so it's not going to pressurize, and it's less likely to dry out that way. If your starter doesn't seem to be perking up as it should, give it, a day, give it an extra day, give it some flexibility, give it some love and leniency. And if it's still not acting like how you think it should, then you can replace your flour, so 1 to 2 tablespoons of your flour with rye flour. Rye flour will kind of kick it up a notch and give it a big boost of activity, and that should help it get it to where you want it to be. And again, like I said too, you can also crumble it in a coffee grinder, and that basically pulverizes it into a powder. And then you can put it in small little baggies. You can store it in jars, and then it's a powder. So it actually takes a little less time to revive it when you actually go to want to use it again. So that is basically the process of drying and reviving your sourdough starter. And again, like I talked about, you're going to want to do this as insurance for yourself, as insurance for your sourdough, and for your baking, because anything can happen at any time. So I really, truly want you to go ahead and do this right now. Even when the next time you go feed your starter, take the discard and spread it out. And you can do that if you're in a rush. Like I said in the beginning, it's best if you use it when it's at its peak. But again, if that's the only option you have, then that's better than nothing. And then down the road, maybe if you have some time, you can do it while your starter's at its peak. So lots of flexibility here with this process. And again, I really encourage you guys to dry your starter. Any links of any products or anything I mentioned will be down below in the replay. And again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Leave me any questions as well that you have about this or the sourdough process down below, and I'll be happy to answer those. And I will see you all in the Sourdough Mamas community. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.